and welcome. This is Take the Lead, Change the Game, a podcast for women leaders looking to deepen their knowledge and skills and find enjoyment in the process. We're powered by Safra Leadership. Safra Leadership is a cohort-based coaching experience designed to fuel courage and ignite impact among women professionals. I'm Lindsay Goldford-Gray, and I'm here with my co-host, Mindy Gulati. We're the co-founders of Safra. Together, we bring a blend of leadership coaching, strategy, and lived experience to help women navigate challenges, seize opportunities, and lead with confidence. Today, we're going to talk about psychological safety and what it means in the workplace. So, Mindy, I'm going to kick it over to you to start us off. Why should we care about psychological safety?
Yeah, thanks. I'm excited to talk about this topic because I find that psychological safety is one of the most important aspects to have in a workplace culture in order to bring about the best performance, the best outcomes, inclusion, collaboration, and it really drives profitability. And there's quite a bit of research about that. And so if anyone's kind of hesitant and it's like, oh, what is this thing? I can tell you from a business standpoint and from a leadership standpoint, it's one of the topics you should really invest some time in learning about. We know that, Google did something called Project Aristotle, and they found that psychological safety was the number one predictor of high-performing teams, even more important than experience and talent. And, that's one sort of data point, but I can share with you with my clients, I spend a lot of time developing a high-performance culture and high-performing teams. And I could give you 3 hours worth of examples of the psychological safety being way more important than just experience and talent, because oftentimes you cannot bring out the best talent and people don't know how to use or feel uncomfortable using their experience if they're in a psychologically unsafe environment. And I would say that sort of the last thing is I go into a lot of cultures that are not psychologically safe. And so when you asked, why is this important? A lot of the companies and cultures that I go into that I would say are very low on the psychological safety scale, they end up in legal trouble. They end up with a loss of talent. They end up with low profits. And so seeing sort of the opposite of a psychologically safe environment really tells the tale. And we want to share that with y'all today. Yeah. And Lindsay, I guess from your standpoint, go ahead. Yeah.
No. Go ahead. I was just going to sort of talk about what psychological safety is. So we've talked about why it's important, but what is it? So the sort of premier research on this topic is done by a Harvard researcher named Amy Edmondson. And she defines psychological safety as a shared belief that a team has that the members of the team are safe for taking interpersonal risk. So what that means in practice is that people feel comfortable asking questions, admitting mistakes, sharing ideas, challenging ideas and decisions, and offering dissenting opinions. So it's a place where, and we're going to talk in a minute about what psychological safety is not, but it's not a place where there's complete conflict avoidance and everyone's in agreement all the time and is in fact, I don't want to say the opposite, but a place where the free flowing of ideas and dissenting opinions are welcome and safe. So, Mindy, what is psychological safety not?
Yeah, and psychological safety, there's a lot of misconceptions. And so it's really important to understand what it is not. Going back to Amy Edmondson, she really spends a lot of her research time and writing on correcting misconceptions. And, psychological safety by no means means lowering standards, avoiding conflict, or just being nice. Instead, she really emphasizes that it's about candor. And that sort of goes to that interpersonal risk-taking statement that you went over, Lindsay. Psychological safety enables productive disagreement and productive conflict and the free exchange of ideas because people trust that their input is valued, even if it's critical. And a lot of times when I go into organizations and start talking about psychological safety, sort of the first comment that people will say is, well, does that mean we can't give our employees any feedback? Does that mean we have just to be nice? And kind of the opposite of that. It's a place where you want to give feedback. It's a place where, it's not just about being nice. I mean, it's not to say you should be the opposite of nice and be mean. But psychological safety is really an environment where you genuinely care about people enough that you create a space and an environment and really like an entire ecosystem where you are collaborative in the truest sense. And that can mean disagreeing. And there's other misconceptions that I see quite a bit that are kind of above and beyond what Amy Edmondson has said. And these are sort of anecdotal, but also I think most of us could see this in our own workplaces. And psychological safety, is not about being nice. It also isn't about just getting your way. Oftentimes when people talk about this concept of inclusion, like being seen, valued, and heard, and having your voice heard, that's fantastic. But sometimes your voice or your opinion or your thought is not going to necessarily be the final decision, or it's not going to be the driver of a strategy. That doesn't mean that you're not psychologically safe. We're not always going to get the result that we want. As long as you have a space to offer your opinion, offer your expertise, and it's heard, that's really what we're looking for. Psychological safety also doesn't mean that you have total job security, that you're never going to be held accountable. It doesn't mean that we get to trade off performance just to create a safe environment. Don't get that confused. It's about having a high performing environment, and we should want high performance for ourselves and for our team. But the way to high performance is not command and control and punitive and harmful or oppressive. The way to high performance is actually creating that safe environment. And we can spend more time down the road talking about that. And the other thing is that psychological safety shouldn't be viewed as a policy. A lot of times when I go into companies, they say, let's write this into a policy. And it's not really a policy. It's your culture.
Culture,
and leadership. So this isn't like a policy. We don't have to have a policy around this. I know the lawyers are excited when there's a policy, but we don't need to be doing that. So Lindsay, kind of going through sort of the definition, the misconceptions, where have you seen psychological safety or a lack thereof influence an organization?
Yeah, I'll give you two examples. One of which, there's an organization I've been working with for some time now where before I was on board, what the leadership team was extremely conflict avoidant. And it sort of goes to this concept of being nice. Mm-hmm. And there were some big decisions that needed to be made on the leadership team. Because people were afraid to dissent, there was a false consensus. And it really blew up. And I mean, there was one person, I think, who was dissenting and heard from other people like, oh, I'm so glad you spoke up. Otherwise, I would have, like, just some really interesting dynamics sort of around like, oh, I don't want to rock the boat. And so, now since this past year, and then I was on board sort of in the middle of this and then still on board, we're really sort of like unwinding a lot of harm because of what happened on multiple levels, because people really didn't feel psychologically safe, and it really damaged the organization. On the flip side of that, I'm also involved with an organization that is newer and has a great team. They're all very, what I will say is benevolent, which means they really want to make sure that other people are doing well and thriving and get what they want. And so, I did some interviews of the team and I noticed this, just a couple of offhand comments of like, oh, I'd like to get together in person, but I don't want to inconvenience anyone else. It's only if everybody wants to, like those kinds of comments. And so one of my pieces of feedback in my assessment of the law firm was, you've got to create a forum for normalizing the critical feedback process, right? For people to make suggestions, because you have this wonderful team that's so benevolent. And so, but what that does, if you don't create a runway for, just normalizing like, hey, we could do this better. Should we do this? What happens is people hold it in and you don't know about it oftentimes until it's like too late or going to cause you a major problem. What about you, Mindy? Where have you seen this play out?
Yeah, and I think I love your examples because whether you like it or not, psychological safety is formed or not formed. So I
Everywhere.
mean,
Yeah.
it's everywhere. And so this is one of those areas where you actually, if you spend some time thinking about it being intentional, that's how you create it. If you just say, "Oh, I don't care, this isn't important to us," then it's likely going to fall into the unsafe, and what you brought up
Mhm.
of like the
Yeah.
consensus is not really there. One of the organizations that I worked with, and this was years ago, but they had a really healthy way of setting up what I called like staged or planned conflict sessions. And they were a tech company
I love that.
that was building pretty like complicated software and systems for a large, gigantic organization, one of the world's biggest companies. And they were sort of their like tech team. And they were very nice. And what they were finding is that a lot of times the objections to the technical aspect, the engineering, would come way too late because everyone just kind of wanted to be nice. And so what they ended up doing was they would have these meetings, and I had suggested this. I said, why don't we have like just a space for conflict? And like we were joking, like, is this like a wrestling match? Like, are we setting up people getting in the ring? And I'm like, well, you could look at it like that, but or you could look at it as like everyone takes a deep breath and we get together and we challenge, what's happening. And so they started to have these meetings, and they were fantastic. And they were like basically poke holes in our software, poke holes in our technical, development. And that was like back in like 2021. And they do these now like all the time when they're coming up with a new idea, a new software, a new program, a new launch. Sometimes they do it for comms, even like comms to the company of like poke holes in our communication plan here.
Yeah.
And I find that like it's so amazing because everyone goes in knowing, hey, we're here. This is a space for challenging each other. This is a space, and it's not to go challenge in a mean way. It's, hey, we want to have the best product, and we also don't want to run into a problem when it's a little bit too late. So that's where I've seen like a really healthy dynamic. And then I've seen, companies that were really stuck in this command and control, like method of leadership of like, just do what I say. And then they wonder why their teams aren't performing. And it's because the team has no voice. They're really not included in decisions. And if there is a concern, they're too scared, both personally, but they're sort of scared of like, how is the organization going to take this? And so I see that quite a bit. And what the outcome of that is almost always attrition and people leaving the company.
People just leaving because they never raised the issue.
Because if it's unpsychologically safe, you're not going to raise the issue. You're just going to quit. And I actually had a conversation with someone earlier this week, and he asked me, do you believe the statement that people quit their managers, not the company? And that's like a common leadership saying, is like people leave their managers, they don't leave a company. And I said, I don't totally agree with that, because I think sometimes company culture is unpsychologically safe, and that people leave the company because they feel like there's nobody I can go to, let alone my own manager. And so this company, this culture here is not a place where I'm ever going to be able to be safe. And so it was interesting because, kind of thinking that through, like, is this manager specific or is it company specific? And I'm going to argue it's both. And I think that one manager can make an unpsychologically safe environment, but if a company doesn't pay attention to this, your entire culture can be unpsychologically safe, or it can be very psychologically safe, which is the goal of some of the conversations we're having.
Right. Absolutely. I totally agree with that a manager can make or break, but ultimately it's the company that sets the culture of the firm and makes it not socially acceptable to behave in certain ways, or socially acceptable to behave in certain ways that are toxic. So
yeah.
Awesome. Well, we're going to keep it somewhat brief today. I know, Mindy, you've got to go get on a plane, and we're going to continue this conversation next week and probably beyond that, because we feel like it's a really important topic, and again, affects everybody and every organization. So thanks for joining us today, and we'll see you next week. Bye, everybody.